Please welcome Dave Gast.
Thank you so much, Stacy. I'll try to hold this mic close so we can make sure everybody can hear. What an honor to be with everybody today on this very special day. I always get a little emotional on this day. I was talking to Hal J this morning on WBAP, and he was talking about how he hates to talk about this day. And I said, you know, me too, but I also never want to forget this day. And I don't want our nation to forget this day. Because sometimes I feel like it's September 10th all over again. And there's another 9/11 around the corner. But before I get started, I want to thank you, Randy, for having me out today. I want to thank Rachel and Liz on the AV back there. We're gonna see if I can actually, if the tutorial actually worked on helping me with the clicker. And Manny and his team with the food. Thank you so much. It was fantastic. And I managed not to get it all over myself, which is even better. So thank you so much. Mr. Wright, congratulations on joining the Rotary. Congratulations. This is a great organization. And Stacy's right. We've known each other for a really long time. And she was one of the people that kind of took me under her wing when I first moved to Dallas back in 1985. And we had a great time in the old Dallas Press Club. And I don't know if y'all remember, but we used to put on gridiron shows, you know, where all these reporters and PR people and everything sang and danced and put on a show and raised scholarship money. It was, those days don't exist anymore, but those were the good old days. But before I get started, I really would like to take a moment of silence to not only remember all the victims of 9/11, some that are still dying today because of their medical conditions, suffering at the Twin Towers and at the Pentagon, and for all of our men and women who are still making the ultimate sacrifice, protecting our freedom and fighting terrorism after 9/11. So if you please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you so much. So my story of 9/11, I just point that way. I'm going to be teaching.
There you go.
There we go. So my story of 9/11 actually began on Friday, September 7th, when I was interviewed for about 4 hours out of the old DFW admin building by about 20 of DFW's top executives. And so on Monday, September the 10th, about 4 o'clock, I get a call from DFW, and they offered me the job of VP of Public Affairs. And I really did consider it a dream job. All my years working in the media, working with reporters, working with government officials, I just thought it would be perfect to do. So I was really thrilled to be offered the job. And of course, you know, what do we all do when we are offered a job? We always say, well, I gave the standard answer, thank you so much, and, you know, can I have a couple days to think about it? And of course, they said yes, and, you know, so I went to bed that night. So September 11th, Tuesday, September 11th, Don's here. Y'all remember, it was a beautiful day, blue skies, just like it was in New York, and it was 7:45. These timelines are very important. 7:45 in the morning, Central Time. I was taking my 4-year-old son to preschool. He's now 28 years old, awesome, engaged. American Airlines Flight 11 hits the North Tower at 8:46 Eastern Time. I call the airport, tell them that I'm willing to come in right now and get voicemail. Everybody's kind of busy. I get home, 17 minutes later, American Airlines 175 slams into the South Tower. At 8:03 a.m., I knew this was a terrorist attack. The first thing I did was hung my American flag outside my house. I then put on my suit and started driving straight to the airport. Jock Bethune is sitting here. He was working in American. He knows where that old admin building is. So I was pulling up to the admin building. My phone rings. And this is when cell phones were still kind of new. They weren't all fancy like they are today. And they said, "We'd love for you to come in." And I said, "I'm right here in the parking lot." So I come walking into the parking lot. I come walking into the building, and there's a gentleman, still my good friend, Daryl Thornton, VP of Human Resources. And he's standing there, and he says, "Ken, I'm glad you're here. I need to take you to this room for a minute and get you to sign some papers." And I'm like, "Well, what kind of papers do I need to sign?" We had to negotiate a salary. I didn't really even accept the job. Really? But I said, I'm going to go to work. I need to be here today. So I looked down at the paper much like this, and it says on top of that paper, life insurance policy. They wanted me to have a life insurance policy signed before I started work that day. I thought that was very, very thoughtful and incredible that they thought of that with all the mayhem going on that morning. Wow. Because nobody knew what was going to happen that day. Nobody. And this is about 9:30 in the morning. So this is the only picture. I was telling the ladies back in AV, this is the only picture that exists of me working on 9/11. And a little bit darker hair. I've lost a little weight, thank God, over the years. But a friend of mine at the Dallas Morning News took that picture for me and sent it to me about a week later. He said, "I thought you'd like to have it for historical purposes." I'm so glad I still got that. But so what I couldn't believe was when I got there, the old admin building where the board met was already just full of reporters. Not only all the local reporters, but all the network reporters. And this is the most ironic part of all. So that same room where all of the executives were grilling me on Friday, we're all back in that room. I'm standing in the exact place I was in front of this whiteboard where they were asking me all these things. They're sitting at the table. Well, now they're all sitting there asking me, "What are we going to do?" I mean, it was just surreal. And so I said, and there, as we're going on and talking about this, there are still images like this coming across the TV. And so here's what I said. And of course, everybody is still just, what I was really most impressed with was there was nobody in panic mode in that airport conference room. There was nobody freaking out. There was nobody yelling. It was just, what are we going to do? What are we going to say? And so that's exactly what I told them. As an old reporter, I said, look, there's a lot of things I know we can't say, and we don't know. So what can we say, and what do we know? And it was just like this room for about 10 seconds, dead silence. And all of a sudden, somebody raises their hand and goes, "Hey, we're going to open all of the toll plazas and let everybody go. We're not going to charge anybody to get in or out. We're just going to let everybody go." I said, "That's great." So I wrote that down on the board. And then we came up with a couple more things. And within 1 hour, I'm not being braggadocious, but within 1 hour, I had my two bosses up there. That's Jim Price. Anybody remember Jim Price? Jock, I bet you remember you do. Y'all remember Kevin Cox? Kevin Cox was my direct boss. I had those. I wrote those guys' remarks, and I had those two guys on within the first hour, talking nationally on all the networks and to the local media about what DFW was doing. And so many of the airports that day, were not talking. And I just thought I was so glad that my bosses trusted me to know that, to be able to share information when everybody was panicking around the country and didn't know what was going on, to be able to say something about what was going on was the way to go. And so that was pretty cool, and I really appreciated that. And so then they keep going on. I'm going to learn how to run this thing by the time it's over. This is what was going on in the terminals. Okay, you can tell it's 2001. Look whose shirts they're selling. Well, the decision was made. Again, I'm giving you blow by blow. I'm watching my time, so I know y'all are particular about your time, and I am too. The decision was made to turn all the TVs off in all 4 of the terminals. I'm always asked about that. That was above my pay grade. But they did not want to have any more than the TV coverage on, because there were about 175,000 people in those terminals that day, and they didn't want to scare people anymore. So, what happened next? Of course, the bomb dogs go out. DFW was at that time the only airport in the country that had its own SWAT team. So the SWAT team is deployed everywhere. So next up, we have there's a conference call, and y'all have seen this. Y'all have seen this depicted in movies. It is true. About 10:30, 11 o'clock. I forget exactly the time, but the FAA had a nationwide conference call with all of the airports. Now remember, I just got there, right? You have to have security clearance for my job. I didn't have security clearance either. And how many people remember Alvy Dotson? He'll be so glad to hear. There you go. He'll be so glad to know that I remember him today. Alvy Dotson takes me to the old public safety station where the DFW folks are going to be on that conference call. And he takes me by the nape of my neck and just throws me in this room, because everybody that was going to be in there was going to have security clearance, right? FBI, everything. Just threw me in there. And that was where the decision was made to ground all of the air traffic across the United States. Now, as you can imagine, that's never been done in the history of aviation. And this was one of the last planes to land before that decision was made. These are people, are you ready for this? I'm sorry I get emotional. This plane was an American Airlines flight from New York to LaGuardia. And these people had just got off the plane and figured out the towers were gone. Fort Worth Star Telegram took that picture. I want to make sure they get credit for that, because that's just an amazing picture. So, how are you going to land 4,500 planes across the United States of America? Somehow it got done. Over 400 planes came down to DFW. 400. And of course, DFW can handle that. That's American Airlines, whose flags already have staff that day. DFW can handle that because you've got seven runways. You know, Dallas and Fort Worth couldn't agree on very much, but one of the things they did agree on was to build that airport big. And so we had 7 runways, 4 terminals. Now we're going to have 6. But 7 runways, you fit a lot of airplanes on there. So by the end of that day, there were 400 airplanes parked on those 7 runways. 400. Now the other part of that was, you had 175,000, 200,000 people who weren't supposed to be there that day that were all of a sudden at DFW. Just like there were at airports around the country. So what are you going to do with all these people? And again, this is where I credit Arlington and so many other cities around the airport who really stepped up that day. Not only our DFW employees, people that worked in the administration building, that did not work on the airfield, they actually took home, international pastors. You know, you always hear the story about Gander, Newfoundland, and about, you know, Come From Away, the movie and the musical and everything. What happened right here, too? People took home international pastors, local pastors, took them into their homes for 3 days. You know, the ground stop was for 3 days, but a lot of planes still didn't take off after 3 days. People stayed there for a week. Local churches here in Arlington took in people. Arlington was one of the main cities that came to the rescue at DFW. Be very proud of that. Look at these folks. You think Americans are going to somehow find a way to find out what's happening? This is long before the days of cell phones, right? You have your TV on the cell phone. Somebody found a TV, hooked it up to the back of their car, and they're all watching on the curb at Terminal C. And of course, there wasn't a rent-a-car left in the place. As I found out later, the receptionist for the entire airport, can you imagine? There was used to be one receptionist to answer the phone for the entire airport, worked in my department. Somebody called her up, she told me later, and says, how do I get from here to Cleveland? But yeah, got a rent-a-car left. And of course, this is what we saw. That night, that's what Fort Worth looked like. And I remember standing with Alvy in Terminal C when all 175,000 passengers were off that airport. And we were standing in Terminal C, and it was dark, and there wasn't a soul in there. And the automatic doors opened, and the wind was so strong that it would come through the concourse. You know, it was like a wind tunnel, right? And so it was just blowing newspapers and everything everywhere. And it was just, I mean, again, the only word I can say is it was surreal. And Alvy told me, and I'll never forget this, he said, and he's absolutely right, this was the first time since the day before opening day of the airport in 1974 that every terminal at DFW had ever been empty, completely empty. Since the day before opening day. And you know, that's the way it's at for 3 days. Just like that. But then, you know, somehow, like we always do here in America and here in Texas, everybody pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and kept going. And we were very proud to say that the first flight after the ground stopped lifting was an American Airlines flight. I thought that was so great that it was an American Airlines flight from Toronto to DFW. That was the first flight allowed back into U.S. airspace and landed in DFW. We were very proud of that. This was our first responders having a memorial service at the airport. I mean, the pain has never left. It's always going to be there. Now, I got to tell you a really neat thing, a couple of different things that happened as I closed up. One of the things that was going on at the airport as the months went on is DFW was in the midst of building a new public safety station on the airfield to hold fire trucks and more emergency equipment. And so I was called in to help with the news media about that. And one of the things I asked was, so are we dedicating this building to anybody? And nobody had thought about it. And I said, well, I got an idea. Why don't we dedicate it to the first responders of 9/11? And everybody thought that's a great idea. And so by then, Mike Bloomberg was the mayor of New York. So the one thing good about those guys, Price and Cox, you know, if you came up with an idea and and they liked it, they let you go run with it. So I wrote a letter to the chief of staff, Mike Bloomberg, and told him what we were going to do. They loved it, so they sent representatives of NYPD, FD, EMS, and the Port Authority of New Jersey. So you might remember Alan Black, fire chief at DFW that ended up being taken out of his job when he retired. That's him. So on 9/11/2002, we dedicated that public safety station, and that night, they all threw out the first pitch at the ballpark at Arlington. Y'all all know John Blake, right? Called John Blake and I said, hey, what would you think about if I brought all 4 of these guys out there and had them introduce them on the field and had them throw out the first pitch? He said, we'd love it. Again, it brings me to tears because it's so incredible. And all of it at once, throwing out that first pitch. I mean, there was just thunder out there at the old ballpark. They kind of got a kick out of it, too. They had a good time. But then, one last thing, what about Terminal D? Terminal D was a hole in the ground on September 11th, 2001. And the board, DFW board, mayors of Dallas and Fort Worth, your representatives, what are we going to do with that? A lot of airports after 9/11 decided to pull back all their construction projects, everything. DFW said, we're not going to do that. Okay, we've already spent millions of dollars on this thing. And to leave it as a hole in the ground? So the airport, I mean, they made one of the most historic decisions and most courageous decisions ever for our region. They said, we're going to go ahead and build DFW Airport. And we're going to go ahead and build Terminal D at DFW Airport. By golly, we did. And, 2004, it's still being built. That's 3 years later. But you remember the Skylink train came on too. Replaced the little train that could, but you had to pay to ride on. Y'all remember that? But then Holly's gonna like this one. That was me greeting the first plane to come into International Terminal D, giving them the hook 'em horn sign. And of course, you see the pilot giving it to me back. That's the Aeromexico flight. So as I close, I just want to tell you how proud I am of Arlington. Just like New York, y'all really pulled it together and helped us so much today on September 11th. Everything you all have done for this community ever since. All of the patriotism that you've shown, the great events you've thrown, your sponsorship of the event tonight, which is just going to be absolutely amazing. I just thank you all for it. Most of all, I want to say thank you. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you so much.